Before we get to pH, we need to talk briefly about chemical reactions. Let's start with one we're already pretty familiar with. When we drop table salt into water, it dissolves. At a molecular level, the sodium and chloride dissociate. Let's diagram that as a chemical reaction. Sodium chloride, arrow, sodium ion plus chloride ion. When we read a chemical reaction, the things on the left side of the arrow are what we call the reactants, and the things on the right side of the arrow are called the products. We can read the arrow as reacts to form. In this case, we actually should be using a double-headed arrow, or a symbol that looks like this. This is what you'd more commonly see in chemistry, which indicates that this reaction is reversible. What controls which way this reaction goes? Well, at a simple level, it's concentration. Reversible reactions like this have a concentration of all of these things in which the reaction is at equilibrium. That doesn't mean that nothing is happening. It means that a few molecules are doing this and a few molecules are doing that. But the net consequence is that we aren't making more of these things or of these things. We can think of equilibrium as the state in which the rate of the forward reaction equals the rate of the reverse reaction. And where we reach equilibrium is due to concentration of the reactants in the products. It doesn't mean that the concentrations of these things are all equal. It means that they're present in concentrations that don't tend to change with time. But if we change the concentration, then we can drive the reaction in one direction or the other. If we add more sodium chloride to solution, then the reaction goes from left to right until it reaches equilibrium once again. And if we add a whole bunch of sodium ions and chloride ions, the reaction will run from right to left, and we will make some sodium chloride again until the reaction reaches equilibrium. Sometimes we'll see molecular structures instead of chemical formulae. For example, here is a reaction in which we're showing the structures of the molecules involved. This is the production of sucrose from glucose and fructose. So we can read the reaction, glucose plus fructose react to form sucrose. What are the reactants here? Well, the reactants are glucose and fructose, and the product is sucrose. This reaction takes place in plants as well as in some algae and cyanobacteria. Plants store energy in the form of sucrose, particularly in their fruits and nectar, and this reaction can run both ways as well. Now, one more quick note. We use arrows for other things as well, and you've already seen this because you've seen this idea. DNA arrow, RNA arrow, protein. In this case, this is not a chemical reaction. Instead, it's a diagram showing the flow of information. You should not read this as DNA reacts to form RNA, which reacts to form proteins. No. Instead, we're saying that information from DNA is being used to make a particular RNA, which is being used to make a particular protein. Here's another example of how we use arrows. This is melanocortin 1 receptor. It's a protein that is embedded in the cell's outer plasma membrane, and it responds to another protein called melanocyte-stimulating hormone, or MSH. When MSH binds to it, it's activated, and it sends a signal to the cell nucleus to produce eumelanin, which is the brown or black pigment that gives color to our skin, hair, and eyes. The arrow here is showing that melanocortin 1 receptor activates the production of eumelanin. It's not saying that melanocortin 1 receptor turns into eumelanin. Okay, to summarize, chemical reactions can be written like this. Reactants react to form products, but we also use arrows to show that one thing activates another thing. It's often really clear by the context which kind of arrow we're using, but if you're ever confused about which type of arrow you're seeing, please ask your instructor.